It's roughly 170,000 years ago. You're a human, barely recognizable as one, but still. You wake up, you stretch, you look around at the African savanna. The sun is rising, the grass is moving in the wind. Somewhere in the distance, something is already hunting something else. And at absolutely no point do you think to yourself, you know what would really complete this morning? Pants. And yet, here we are. Billions of people, every single morning, reaching for something to put on before they do anything else. We don't question it. We don't think about it. We just get dressed. But stop for 1 second and actually think about how strange that is. Act 1. The naked ape problem. Before we get to the lice, we need to address something that doesn't get enough attention. Humans are almost completely hairless. Stop and think about that zoologically for a moment. Gorillas? Covered. Chimpanzees? Covered. Bears, lions, wolves, horses, elephants, hippos. All of them, across wildly different environments and climates, walking around in full coats. And then there's us, standing in the middle of all that biodiversity, smooth, patchy, weirdly exposed, like we used to have fur but made some choices we're not fully prepared to explain. Scientists have a leading theory for why this happened. As our ancestors moved from forests onto open grasslands and began running long distances to hunt, thick fur became a liability. You'd overheat, you'd slow down, your core temperature would spike before you ever caught what you were chasing. So, over hundreds of thousands of years, we shed the fur and replaced it with something stranger: sweat glands. Humans have between 2 and 4 million sweat glands on their bodies, more than almost any other animal on Earth. We are, without exaggeration, the greatest sweating machines in the history of this planet. Elite, world-class, professional-grade moisture emitters. If there were Olympics for sweating, we would win every category and it wouldn't be close. This is excellent news in summer. It is considerably less useful when you... Act 2. The timeline that breaks everything. Here's the conventional story. Humans migrated out of Africa, hit colder climates, got cold, wrapped themselves in animal skins. Simple, clean, logical. A 5-year-old could work it out. Except the timeline doesn't work. And once you notice that, the whole neat explanation starts to collapse. Genetic evidence suggests humans started wearing clothes somewhere between 100,000 and 170,000 years ago. But modern humans didn't begin migrating out of Africa in significant numbers until around 70,000 years ago. Which means clothing appears tens of thousands of years before humans went anywhere cold. So, if warmth was the reason, why were people getting dressed in the middle of the African savanna? Something else was happening first. Something that had less to do with temperature and far more to do with something deeper in human nature. But before we get there, we need to talk about the lice. Act 3. The lice that knew first. Researchers at the University of Florida were doing what geneticists do, staring at extremely small things for extremely long periods of time. And they decided to map the complete evolutionary history of human lice. Now, here's the biology you need to understand. Humans have 2 distinct types of lice: head lice, which live in hair, and body lice, which specifically live in clothing, in the seams, in the folds, in the fabric itself. They are 2 genetically separate populations, and body lice evolved directly from head lice at one specific moment in history. Here is why that matters completely. Body lice cannot survive on bare human skin. They need fabric. They need the warmth and shelter that clothing provides. Which means the exact moment body lice genetically diverged from head lice is the exact moment humans started wearing clothes consistently enough to create an entirely new home for a parasite. When researchers ran the genetic numbers, body lice split from head lice somewhere between 83,000 and 170,000 years ago. Sit with that for a moment. A parasitic insect, one of the most universally despised creatures in human existence, the thing that shuts down elementary schools and destroys camping trips, accidentally preserved the earliest evidence of human fashion. The lice knew when we got dressed before we did. They were there. They adapted. They moved in. That is either one of the most beautiful things in science or one of the most deeply unsettling. Probably both simultaneously. So, if warmth wasn't the original driver, what was? Theory 1, basic physical protection. Not from cold, from everything else. Sun, insects, sharp vegetation, rocky ground, thorns that opened small wounds that, without treatment, could kill you within days. A basic wrap of animal hide between skin and the savanna created a meaningful barrier against the thousand small things that wanted to damage you. Simple, unglamorous, but probably true. Theory 2 is where it gets genuinely interesting. Social signaling. Humans are, at our absolute core, status-obsessed social animals. We are constantly, compulsively broadcasting who we are, what group we belong to, what rank we hold, whether you should fear us or follow us or stay away from us entirely. We do this with posture, with voice, with facial expression.
Level 4. And almost certainly, from very early on, with what we put on our bodies. Here is the piece of evidence that changes everything. Our ancestors were using ochre, a red pigment, to decorate their bodies as far back as 200,000 years ago. That is before the lice evidence for clothing, before needles, before stitched garments, before any of it. We were painting ourselves before we were dressing ourselves. The impulse to use the body as a signal.
Act 5. The needle. For most of early human history, clothing was rough. A skin draped over the shoulders, held in place with twisted sinew. Functional, ungainly. The prehistoric equivalent of wearing a bin bag. Gets the job done, nobody wins any awards. Then, around 50,000 years ago, something shifted in the archaeological record. Researchers began finding needles. Not just sharp tools for punching holes, actual needles, with tiny eyes bored through one end, designed for threading sinew and stitching material together with precision. The oldest confirmed needle with a proper eye was found in Denisova Cave in Siberia, made from the hollow bone of a bird, shaped and polished to a fineness that is genuinely extraordinary. And what it represents is a cognitive leap that is almost impossible to fully absorb. Someone looked at a sliver of bone, envisioned a tool that did not yet exist, worked out how to bore a clean hole through the narrow end without splitting it, and used the finished object to join two pieces of material with a controlled, repeatable stitch. That is not survival instinct. That is engineering. That is imagination solving a problem that brute force cannot. And that needle mattered more than almost anything else from that era, because you can live without pottery. You can live without cave paintings. In Act 6, we weren't alone. Here's the part that usually gets left out, because it complicates the comfortable story that modern humans invented everything. Neanderthals were making and wearing clothes too, and doing it well before they ever encountered us. Archaeological evidence shows Neanderthals systematically processing animal hides, scraping bones in patterns consistent with leather preparation, using specific tools designed for working skin, managing carcasses in ways that suggest the hide mattered as much as the meat. They were cold, they adapted, they built a second skin, just as we did. And then there are the Denisovans, the mysterious third human lineage we only discovered in 2010 from a single finger bone found in that same Siberian cave. In the same archaeological layers as that extraordinary needle, researchers found pierced and polished ornaments. A people we barely know existed were already thinking about what they were wearing and how it looked, which forces a question that doesn't resolve easily. Is clothing a human invention, or is it simply what happens when any creature becomes intelligent enough, social enough, and cold enough to realize that wrapping yourself in something is just obviously correct? We don't know. But the fact that multiple separate species arrived at the same answer independently is very hard to dismiss.
Act 7. When it became survival. Between 120,000 and 70,000 years ago, Earth went through a series of brutal glacial cycles. Temperatures collapsed. Ice expanded across continents. Large portions of Africa became desert. Lakes vanished. Food sources disappeared for years at a time. The human population may have crashed to between 10,000 and 30,000 individuals. We nearly went extinct. We came astonishingly close to simply not existing anymore before we'd even properly begun. For the survivors, and especially for the groups that eventually pushed north into Europe and east into Central Asia, clothing was no longer social signal, no longer practical comfort. It was the difference between living until morning and not. The groups that had developed sophisticated clothing technology, fitted, layered, stitched, sealed at the wrists and neck where heat escapes fastest, had a survival advantage so profound it shaped everything that followed. They made it through. They had children. Those children inherited not just genes, but knowledge. The knowledge of how to prepare a hide, how to layer materials, how to stitch a seam that holds against the wind.